First, we need to ask, what is the pop-up? We've already talked about how it's a skill, right? And so a skill, we can improve a skill directly just with better technique. But to understand technique, we need to dive into what that actual technique is. And again, that skill or technique also relies upon strength and flexibility and power, and so we will touch on those things. But first, we need to get some awareness of what is a pop-up. Really, what is it? It is simply a transition from laying to standing. And so what we need to get an idea of is, where do we need to end up standing? What is an efficient surf stance? The reason that's important is because this pop-up, it is a skill, but it is a transition. So if we don't know what we're trying to get into in terms of a stance, being a good stance versus, wow, I'm ready to poo man shred stance, there's a big distinction. Because if I understand I need to get into a good surf stance, I know how to get into that position. And that will be a very different process from getting into this position.
For visual reference, let's take a look at McFanning. And what you're going to see over and over is this athletic sprinter forward-facing lunge stance position. That'll give you a lot better understanding of the positions we need to be in to create forward momentum. And you're going to hear me refer to this sprinter lunge position throughout the program.
So if we start to look at that pop-up as simply just a transition from laying to standing, we can start figuring out what's the path of least resistance to get there. And also, what's the path of least resistance for your body to get there? Because we'll touch on orthopedics later, but maybe you've had a knee reconstruction, maybe you had a hip reconstruction, broken ankle 20 years ago and they fused it. So you might have some changes or some limitations in how your body can or can't move that might affect that process of transitioning to standing, but it's not going to change where we need to end up. So let's dive into a surf stance. Really, if we start dissecting surf stances, generally it's a bit wider than the hips. I'm a natural footer, so imagine I'm going this direction. It's hips starting to face forward, eyes facing forward. Feet, we'll get into some details later, but they're roughly kind of 45 degrees, maybe kind of parallel or perpendicular to the stringer. But it's more so this boxer, athletic, sprinter stance. If you start looking at Slater, McFanning, Dane Reynolds, never are knees facing opposite directions. Very rarely are they cruising down the line with one arm forward and the back half of their body backwards. This is a crab surfer. This is a boxer, athletic stance, ready to pounce, bring momentum forward surfing position. Good barrel shot, right? Who do you see pro-wise in a barrel doing this? You'll see them in a barrel, crouch. Think Joel Parkinson. This sprinter position, everything is compressed. This is a good surf stance. We'll go to some examples of pros here and there, but start paying attention to videos and start paying attention to the postures and the positioning. This is front-on surfing. This is side-on surfing. The pop-up to get into a crab stance is a very different process from, and we'll get into details later, of transitioning, you saw I got caught on the carpet there, of transitioning into this surf stance, this sprinter, boxer, athletic stance.
See Julian Wilson with a smooth pop-up into an athletic ready position.
So you're going to keep hearing me refer to this boxer, athletic, sprinter stance versus crab. So if you've got an understanding of what that transition is and where it needs to end or put us into, then it's easier to dissect the process of getting there, which is the pop-up. So the surf stance that's generally taught to beginners doesn't work for progression. For beginners, the whole point is be as balanced as possible, be as wide, be as stable as possible, because it's the first time they've been on a big moving surface of a surfboard. This stance seems to sit and get ingrained into bodies of surfers, and this limits all further progression in surfing. Again, would I ride a bicycle going that direction like this? Would I run like this? No, all those things would be done front on, facing the direction that I want to go, creating momentum generation forward. I would run this way. I would surf this way. Okay? So again, that pop-up is a transition, putting us into that momentum forward posture. This gets ingrained in surfers, where the back half of the body faces one direction and the front half of the body faces the other direction. So what you will commonly see practiced with pop-ups is this popping thud, half body backwards, half of the body forwards. This will destroy surfing in your progression. So you've got to really get an understanding that this is not an ideal surf stance and start paying more attention to what that good surf stance is. Because again, if we're going into how a pop-up is traditionally taught into that thudding, heavy position, it's inefficient. It's over-reliant upon power and force. And our surfboard is a floating object. Do we need to thud on top of it and smash our weight down on a floating piece of foam with back half of our body shoving down onto the tail and bogging? Or are we better off starting to teach a pop-up like a walk-up, as if I'm laying on the ground and I want to run that direction down the wave, and I'm driving weight onto that front leg. It is driving just as if I'm dropping into a skate ramp. What happens if you pop up, if you're dropping in on a skate ramp? Wah, back foot heavy, death, head into the coping. So why do people do this in their surfing? Versus momentum forward, reaching forward, running forward, placing weight down onto that front leg to drive the board down the ramp and start to accelerate. So that's just the first introduction of starting to consider surf stance, what used to be taught wrong in surf stances, how pop-ups are commonly trained where it's this, none of this is efficient. Where a pop-up can be as effortless as light and soft, and everything is moving in the direction that I want to go. So now let's keep elaborating on the pop-up and giving you more clarity of what a walk-up actually is.